The rusted, iron gate shrieked like a banshee as I pushed it open, the sound tearing through the unnatural silence of the forest. I winced, my head snapping left and right, scanning the skeletal trees that clawed at the bruised twilight sky. Nothing. No responding moans, no shuffling footsteps. Just the whisper of dry leaves skittering across the cracked asphalt of what used to be a suburban street. I pulled the gate shut, its hinges groaning in protest, and secured it with a length of thick chain and a heavy-duty padlock. It wouldn't stop anything truly determined, but it was enough to deter the aimless wanderers, enough to slow down a small group, and enough to give me a precious few seconds of warning. Home, for now. This abandoned house on the edge of the old Hawthorne Estates development had been my sanctuary for the past 3 weeks, a relic of the before, nestled deep in a cul-de-sac that backed onto a dense patch of woods. It was isolated, overgrown, and mostly overlooked. Perfect. I hauled the heavy duffel bag off my shoulder, the straps digging into the raw skin. Inside, a paltry collection of canned goods, a few bottles of purified water, and a box of slightly crushed energy bars that had cost me 3 harrowing hours in a supermarket overrun with the dead. My reward for survival? Another meal, another day, another night. And tonight was Halloween. The thought slid into my mind unbidden, a ghost from a world that no longer existed. October 31st. I looked up at the sky, where the last vestiges of daylight bled into deep purples and oranges, already giving way to the inky blackness that Halloween always ushered in. A sliver of moon, sharp and cold, hung like a fingernail clipping above the jagged silhouettes of the trees. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Halloween. The night when we used to dress up as monsters, pretending to be terrified, running through well-lit streets for sugary treats. Now, the monsters were real, and the terror was a con. Stent, suffocating blanket. No treats, only tricks of fate, and the constant threat of a slow, agonizing death. I made my way up the cracked concrete driveway, overgrown with weeds and moss. The house itself was a 2-story colonial, once stately, now decaying. Boards covered most of the windows, nailed haphazardly from the inside. The front door, a heavy oak monstrosity, was reinforced with scavenged timber and a series of deadbolts that would make a bank vault jealous. I fumbled for the right key on my ring, my fingers numb with cold and exhaustion, and slid it into the top lock. The click echoed in the silence, startling me even after all these months. My hand went instinctively to the heavy machete sheathed at my hip, its worn leather grip a familiar comfort against my palm. The air inside the house was stagnant, thick with the scent of dust, mildew, and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, the lingering perfume of decay that permeated everything now. Even if I didn't seen a single one of them in days, the air itself carried their essence. I moved through the living room, past overturned furniture and splintered wood, toward the kitchen. My camp was set up there, far from the exposed windows, with a small, scavenged wood-burning stove and a sleeping bag on the floor. I dropped the duffel bag with a thud and sank onto my knees, my muscles protesting. My legs ached, my back screamed, and the dull throb in my temples had escalated into a full-blown headache. I hadn't slept properly and I couldn't even remember. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. Time was marked not by calendars, but by hunger, thirst, and the distance between safe havens. I pulled out a can of peaches. Peaches, a luxury, a distant memory of summer, of sweetness. I tore the lid off with a military-issue can opener, the sharp metal scratching against itself. The syrupy fruit smell was a shock, a sudden, vivid reminder of a time when food wasn't a desperate gamble. I ate. lowly, savoring each bite, the cold sweetness a small mercy on my parched tongue. As I ate, I listened, always listening. The wind rustling through the broken eaves, the distant creak of the house settling, the frantic scurry of mice in the walls. Every sound was analyzed, categorized, friend or foe, natural or unnatural. The line between paranoia and survival had blurred long ago. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into darkness. Inside the house, shadows lengthened and twisted, turning familiar shapes into grotesque monsters. I lit a single candle, its small flame casting dancing patterns on the walls, pushing back the encroaching gloom, but doing little to dispel the sense of dread that clung to the air tonight. I set up my patrol route, a ritual I performed every night, checking the barricades on the ground floor, listening at the reinforced doors, peering through small, strategically cleared peepholes in the boarded-up windows. The world outside was a black canvas, punctuated by the occasional flicker of distant fires, reminders that even in the darkest hours, something was still burning. Cities, suburbs, hopes. As I moved, the thought of Halloween persisted, scratching at the edges of my mind. I remembered one year, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, when Sarah and I had gone as Bonnie and Clyde. We'd laughed, drank too much cheap beer, and kissed under a street lamp, the crisp autumn air nipping at our cheeks. Her laugh, bright and clear, echoed in the empty halls of my memory. Sarah. God, how I missed her. The last I'd seen of her, she was scrambling into a crowded evacuation bus, her eyes wide with terror, her hand reaching for mine as a surging tide of panic, mixed with the newly infected, separated us. I never knew what happened to that bus, or to her. Just another unanswered question, another phantom limb of loss. Tonight, the ghosts weren't just in my head. They were outside, shuffling through the dead leaves, rattling the skeletal lethal branches, and moaning their perpetual hunger. I pressed my ear to the main door, the rough wood cool against my cheek. Nothing but the wind. But the wind carried whispers now, the echoes of 1,000,000 lost souls, or maybe just the sound of my own unraveling mind. I returned to the kitchen, the warmth from the small stove a faint comfort. I pulled out a small leather-bound journal from my pack. It was old, one of Sarah's. She'd always loved writing, journaling her thoughts, her dreams. Now it was my chronicle, a grim record of my days, my struggles, my dwindling hope. I opened it to a blank page, the faint scent of her old perfume still clinging to the worn paper. October 31st, I scrawled, my handwriting shaky in the dim light. Halloween. Funny, isn't it? The world ends, and still the calendar turns. The monsters are real now. No costumes needed, just teeth and hunger. I paused, the pen hovering over the page. Came across an old photo today, pinned to a bulletin board in that supermarket. A kid in a pumpkin costume, missing 2 front teeth, holding a bag of candy, smiling. What I wouldn't give for a smile like that again, or a single piece of candy that isn't stale or moldy. I closed the journal, the weight of it in my hands a tangible representation of all the ghosts I carried. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. It never did. But tonight, the specter of Halloween weighed even harder. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every creak of the house seemed to carry a more sinister intent. The line between what was real and what was merely a figment of my frayed nerves was thin, almost transparent. I stacked a few more pieces of scavenged wood into the stove, watching the flames lick at the dry timber, casting a flickering, uneasy glow. The heat felt good, chasing the chill from my bones,
but it couldn't touch the cold dread that settled deep in my gut. This was my first Halloween night in the new world, and I had a feeling it was gonna be one I wouldn't soon forget.
Forget. Or survive. Hours bled into each other, each minute stretching into an eternity of silence and heightened senses. I sat by the stove, my shotgun cradled in my lap, its cold steel a grounding presence. My eyes traced the flickering candle flame, my mind a whirl of memories and survival calculations. The wind outside picked up, howling through the broken windows, rustling the autumn leaves into a mournful chorus. It sounded like the world was crying, or maybe it was just me. A sudden sharp crack from somewhere deeper in the house made me jump, shotgun snapping up, heart hammering against my ribs. A rat, probably, or the house settling, or something else. Every sound was an alarm, every shadow a potential threat. My breath hitched, held, nothing. The silence returned, heavy and oppressive, punctuated only by the distant, rhythmic creak of a loose board on the second floor. I needed to move. Staying put, even in the relative safety of the kitchen, felt like waiting for the end.
Set to fall. The constant vigilance was exhausting, slowly eroding my sanity, piece by agonizing piece. I decided to make another round, check the perimeter. Perhaps the movement, the action, would quiet the frantic voices in my head. I moved silently through the darkened house, my boots barely scuffing the floor. The flashlight beam cut a narrow swath through the gloom, revealing dusty banisters, peeling wallpaper, and the ever-present detritus of a life abruptly abandoned. In the entryway, a child's backpack lay half-buried under a pile of rubble, its bright, cartoonish fabric a jarring contrast to the grim reality. My gaze snagged on a small plastic pumpkin-shaped bucket lying empty and forgotten by the front door. A trick-or-treat bucket. My breath caught in my throat. The memories hit me then, a wave of bittersweet nostalgia. Sarah and I, taking our nieces and nephews trick-or-treating. Their excited shrieks as they ran from door to door, their small hands clutching those very
same pumpkin buckets. The smell of burning leaves, the crisp autumn air, the collective joy that permeated the neighborhood. It felt like a lifetime ago, like a dream. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold, cheap plastic. It felt flimsy, fragile, a relic of a lost innocence. The irony wasn't lost on me. On this night, the traditional night for masquerade and make-believe monsters, the true monsters roamed free, and there was no pretense, no play acting. This was real, and it was horrific. My thoughts were interrupted by a sound, faint but distinct. Not the wind, not the house settling. A low, guttural moan, coming from outside. My blood ran cold. I froze, every muscle tensed, my ears straining. There it was again, closer this time. I moved slowly, deliberately, toward one of the small peepholes I'd cut into the living room barricade. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating silence. I pressed my eye to the narrow slit, peering out into the pitch black night. The streetlights were long dead, the power grid having collapsed months ago. Only the weak glow of the moon, filtering through thick clouds, offered any illumination. At first, I saw nothing, just the twisted shadows of trees, the dense undergrowth, the familiar outline of my rusty, chained gate. Then, a movement, slow, shuffling. A figure emerged from the tree line, moving with that unmistakable, lurching gait. It was one of them. Its head hung at an awkward angle, its clothes tattered and dark. But what truly sent a jolt of icy fear through me was what it was wearing, or rather, what was left of it.
A bright splash of red, a cape perhaps, torn and flapping in the wind, and on its head, a tattered, misshapen mask. A superhero, or what used to be one. My breath hitched, my mind struggled to process the image. A zombie in a Halloween costume? It was too perfect, too grotesque. The ultimate mockery of everything this night once represented. It shuffled past the gate, oblivious to its presence, continuing down the street toward the center of the old development. Then another appeared, and another, all moving with that same horrific purpose, drawn by nothing I could perceive. No, not nothing. The wind. It was carrying something, a faint scent that my heightened senses recognized with sickening clarity. Blood. Fresh blood. And something else. Something sweet. My mind raced. Someone was out there, or something. A new kill, perhaps, drawing them like moths to a flame. Or maybe it was just the air, on this night. A macabre twist of fate, a Halloween feast for the dead. Panic began to bubble in my gut. My sanctuary, my seemingly safe haven, felt exposed, vulnerable. If they were wandering this close, then my preparations might not be enough. The barricades, the locks, the chain on the gate, all designed for casual wanderers, not a determined horde or a growing cluster drawn by an unseen lure. I watched, frozen, as more figures emerged from the raggeds. One wore what looked like the remains of a witch's hat, its brim flopping over a skull-like face. Another, smaller, in what could have been a skeleton costume, the white bones now stained black with decay. Children. My stomach churned. The innocence of what they once were, now twisted into pure, unadulterated horror. They were moving deeper into the development, away from my secluded cul-de-sac. A small mercy. But the thought of them out there, moving in numbers, dressed in the grotesque remnants of childhood joy, gnawed at me. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was a desecration. I retreated from the peephole, my legs trembling. The silence inside the house no longer felt safe, but suffocating. I needed to know what was drawing them. I needed to understand the threat. And, more importantly, I needed to reinforce my defenses or prepare to abandon this place. The Halloween night was just beginning, and it promised to be a long, terrifying one. I checked my gear. Shotgun, dead, extra shells in a bandolier across my chest, pistol holstered, machete at my hip, knife strapped to my boot, standard kit. But tonight, it felt inadequate. The monsters outside weren't just brain-dead shufflers. They were walking nightmares, draped in the remnants of a world I mourned. I made my way back to the kitchen, my mind racing. The scent of blood and something sweet. It was stronger now, faint but persistent, carried on the wind. It wasn't just a stray few infected. This was a gathering, and gatherings of the dead always meant trouble. My eyes scanned the sparse pantry. Canned goods, dried fruit, rice, beans. Enough to last me another week, maybe two if I rationed heavily. But the water filters were nearly spent, and the last of my medical supplies, a small bottle of antibiotics and a handful of pain relievers, were running dangerously low. This was my Achilles heel. I needed supplies, and I couldn't afford to wait. The thought of going out into the night, into the maw, very heart of this Halloween nightmare, sent a jolt of pure terror through me. But the alternative, slowly starving or succumbing to infection from a minor wound, was a slower, more agonizing death. I had to move. I had to investigate, and if it was an opportunity to scavenge, then I would take it, even if it meant facing down ghosts and costumes. I grabbed my backpack, stuffing in extra ammunition, a water bottle, and a few protein bars. My heavy-duty headlamp felt reassuring in my hand. It was designed for caving, throwing a powerful beam that cut through the thickest darkness. I would need it tonight. I paused at the front door, my hand on the cold steel of the reinforced deadbolts. The wind outside seemed to howl louder, a mournful lament. My breath plumed in the cold air. This was it, the moment of no return. I was leaving the relative safety of my sanctuary, abandoning my self-imposed isolation to face whatever horrors Halloween night had conjured. With a final, fortifying breath, I began to unbar the door. The sound of wood scraping against wood, the metallic click of each lock seemed deafening in the silence. Each movement was deliberate, slow, excruciatingly loud. The door creaked inward, revealing a sliver of darkness, heavy with the smell of damp earth, decaying, and that persistent, sickly sweet aroma. I stepped out, closing the door behind me, securing it as best I could from the outside. The cold air bit at my exposed skin, sending shivers down my spine. I took a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom, my ears straining for any sound. Nothing. Just the wind and the rustling leaves. The infected, for now, had moved on. I moved stealthily down the overgrown driveway, keeping to the shadows, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The gate groaned as I carefully unchained it, pulling it open just enough to slip through. The moment I was on the other side, I pulled it shut, relocking it with practiced efficiency. My last line of defense. Hence, my connection to home, to whatever fragmented sense of normalcy I still clung to. The street was a tunnel of darkness, canopied by the skeletal branches of old oak trees. Houses stood like vacant-eyed sentinels, their windows either shattered or boarded up, their lawns choked with weeds. The silence here was different from the silence in my house. It was deeper, more profound, broken only by the crunch of dry leaves under my boots. Every step felt impossibly loud. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking threat. I activated my headlamp, a powerful beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, but kept it pointed at the ground, hoping to avoid drawing unwanted attention. The air was thick with the smell of autumn decay, mixed with the ever-present stench of death. And that sweet smell, it was stronger now. I started walking, my pace slow and deliberate, my senses on high alert. I gripped the shotgun tightly, my finger resting on the trigger guard. Every nerve ending screamed caution.
Nyan. This wasn't just a scavenging run. This was a descent into a nightmare. Then I saw it, a glint of light in the distance, a flicker of something unnatural, and with it a low, collective groan. Closer this time, many of them. I extinguished my headlamp, melting back into the shadows of an overgrown hedge, my body pressed against the cold, rough brick of an abandoned house. I peered through the gaps in the foliage, my eyes straining, trying to pierce the darkness. The light flickered again, a reddish-orange glow, illuminating a cluster of figures in the middle of the street, maybe 2 blocks away. A bonfire. Someone had started a bonfire. Or something. And the infected were drawn to it, like grotesque, hungry moths to a deadly flame. My blood ran cold. A bonfire on Halloween night. It was a beacon, an invitation to every monstrosity within a mile radius. And the sweet smell? Now I recognized it. Burnt sugar. The stench of charring candy, mixing with the sickening aroma of singed hair. Flesh. I counted them. 10, 20, 30. More were shambling out of driveways, emerging from the woods, drawn by the light and the smell. They were forming a loose, undulating circle around the source of the fire, and some of them, caught in the flickering, hellish light, were still wearing their costumes. A decaying princess, a zombie clown with half its painted smile ripped away, a skeletal cowboy with a missing jaw. It was a grotesque masquerade, a chilling tableau that burned itself into my memory. My first instinct screamed to run, to retreat, to bolt back to my imperfect sanctuary. But the bonfire was right in the heart of the older section of the development, where the houses were larger, the pantries likely better stocked, and more importantly, where the chances of finding vital medical supplies or water filters were higher. This was a risk, a monumental gamble, but it might be the only one I'd get for weeks. I took a deep, shaky breath, the cold air burning my lungs. I had to be smart. I couldn't engage them head on, but I could use the distraction. The bonfire, the infected's morbid fascination with it, could be my cover. I began to move, hugging the shadows, moving from house to house, using the overgrown bushes and neglected fences as cover. My steps were silent, deliberate, my body a coiled spring. The sound of their moaning grew louder, a chilling symphony that filled the night. The crackle of the bonfire was surprisingly loud, a hungry roar in the otherwise silent world. I reached the periphery of the chaos. The heat from the bonfire was palpable, radiating through the cold night air. I could make out the source of the sweet smell now. An old ice cream truck, or what was left of it, had been set ablaze. Its colorful paint was peeling, its once cheerful jingle silenced forever. The melted remains of its sugary cargo sizzled and popped in the flames, creating a sickeningly sweet perfume of burning sugar, plastic, and something metallic. A tested Halloween treat. The infected were a writhing, moaning mass around it. Some pressed against the burning metal, their flesh sizzling, eyes glazed over, seemingly drawn by the heat and the scent. Others simply milled around, their arms outstretched, their empty jaws working. They were a perverse congregation, drawn to a burning effigy of their past. My objective was clear. Use the distraction to get into one of the houses on the far side of the street, raid it quickly, and get out. The closest one, a large two-story with a dark, sprawling porch, looked promising. Its windows were dark, unbroken, a good sign, perhaps. I waited for a lull, for a shift in their attention, for the right moment. My headlamp remained off. My night vision, honed by months of darkness, was working overtime. The flickering firelight cast grotesque shadows, making it difficult to distinguish between still figures and moving ones. A sudden sharp scream split the night, not from one of the infected, a human. Nasty scream. A woman. My blood ran cold, fear and a flicker of something else, responsibility, humanity, warring within me. The infected closest to the bonfire reacted, turning their heads, a wave of moans sweeping through the horde. They shuffled in unison, like iron filings to a magnet, away from the burning truck, toward the source of the scream. Damn it! Someone else was out here, and they were in trouble. My survival instinct screamed at me to stay put, to use this new distraction to my advantage, to get into the house, get what I needed, and get out. But the scream, it had been raw, primal, full of unadulterated terror, the kind of terror I knew all too well. I hesitated, my gaze sweeping from the distracted horde to the direction of the scream, then to the inviting darkness of the untouched house. Every fiber of my being wanted to ignore it, to be selfish, to survive. But something deeper, something buried beneath months of grit and grime, stirred within me. A ghost of who I used to be. The scream came again, weaker this time, punctuated by a desperate plea. "Help me, please!" My decision was made. Survival wasn't just about me. Not tonight. Not on Halloween. a night that once stood for community, for shared experience, for a fleeting sense of safety. I couldn't leave someone to die, not if I had even a ghost of a chance to help. It was a stupid, reckless, dangerous decision, and it was the only one I could make. I adjusted my grip on the shotgun, flipped on my headlamp, and sprinted into the dark, towards the scream, towards the very heart of the nightmare. The world exploded into a chaotic symphony of moans, shrieks, and the thud of my boots on the cracked asphalt. My headlamp beam bounced wildly, illuminating brief, horrifying flashes of the scene unfolding before me. The scream had come from an alleyway between two dilapidated houses, barely 50 yards from the main street. I burst into the alley, my shotgun raised, heart hammering against my ribs. 3 of them were cornering a figure, snarling, reaching. The source of the sweet smell was clearer now, not just the bonfire, but something else, a faint, cloying sweetness, like rotting fruit. "Hey!" I roared, my voice raw, breaking the silence. It was a stupid move, drawing attention to myself, but it bought a fraction of a second. The 3 infected turned, their heads snapping toward my light and sound. Their faces, caught in my beam, were a mosaic of decay, eyes milky, jaws slack. One was wearing a shredded superhero cape, another a tattered witch's hat. The third, horrifyingly, a child's bright yellow duck costume, now dark with filth and blood. The figure they were cornering was a young woman, perhaps 16 or 17, huddled against a rusted dumpster, her arms wrapped around her head. She was dressed in what looked like a homemade fairy costume, tattered green dress, flimsy wings askew, her face pale with terror. She wasn't screaming anymore, just whimpering, a broken
sound. I didn't hesitate. The shotgun roared, the blast deafening in the enclosed alleyway. The superhero, closest to the girl, stumbled, its head exploding in a shower of gore. It dropped, twitching. The witch and the duck lunged, drawn by the sound, by the light, by the sudden absence of their prey. I pumped the shotgun, the spent shell ejecting with a metallic ping, and fired again. The witch took the blast in the chest, staggering back, but didn't fall. Its eyes were still locked on me, its jaw snapping. Head, always the head. I adjusted my aim, a fraction of a second, and fired again. The witch's head snapped back, a sickening crunch, and it collapsed. The duck, smaller but surprisingly fast, was on me. Its rotting hands grabbed at my jacket, fingers surprisingly strong, trying to pull me down. Its putrid breath, reeking of decay and that cloying sweetness, washed over my face. I brought the butt of the shotgun down on its head, hard. It grunted, a wet, choking sound, but held on. On. These were strong. Stronger than they looked. I kicked out, connecting with its knee, heard a crack, but it barely registered. I twisted, trying to dislodge its grip, pulling the machete from its sheath with my free hand. The cold steel felt good, familiar. I swung, aiming for the neck, but it moved, and the blade bit into its shoulder instead. It let out a wet shriek, and its grip loosened for a split second. Enough. I pulled back, swung again, this time aiming for the head. The machete cleaved through bone and decaying flesh. The duck dropped, silent. I stood there, gasping, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling my nostrils, mixing with the stench of decay and something else, that sweet, cloying aroma. My blood pounded in my ears. I turned to the girl, who was now staring at me, her eyes wide with shock and fear, framed by the few remaining fairy wings. "Are you bit?" I demanded, my voice rough. She shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her grime-streaked face. "No, no, I don't think so. Thank you. Oh, God, thank you."
Her voice was a fragile whisper, barely audible over the receding moans of the infected on the main street, still drawn to the bonfire. I moved closer, checking her quickly. No visible wounds, no tears in her tattered dress, just scrapes and bruises from being thrown against the dumpster. Her fairy wings were shredded. Her small canvas trick-or-treat bag, a pale pink thing, half full of brightly wrapped candies, lay spilled at her feet. That was the sweet smell, not the bonfire. Candy, the ultimate Halloween irony. "Get up," I ordered, keeping my voice firm, trying to cut through her shock. "We need to move, now. More are coming." She nodded, scrambling to her feet, her legs shaky. She stooped to grab her spilled candy, but I pulled her back. "Leave it. It's what drew them. It's what will draw more." She looked at the candy, then at me, a flash of defiance in her eyes. "It's for my brother. He loves chocolate." My heart twisted. Another ghost. Another loss. "We can't. Not now. We need to go." "Julie," she whispered, as if the name itself was a plea. "My name's Julie." "Alex," I replied, my gaze sweeping the alley, ensuring the immediate threat was neutralized. The main street was still a mess of shuffling figures, but they were slowly turning back toward the bonfire. The immediate danger was lessening, but it wouldn't last. "Come on, Julie. We need to find shelter, and fast." I grabbed her arm, my touch gentle despite the urgency, and pulled her toward the other end of the alley. She was small, thin, clearly traumatized, but she was alive, and for tonight, that was enough. My plan to scavenge alone was out the window. Now I had a new burden, a survivor. Another mouth to feed, another life to protect, another reason to keep fighting, another reason to live. We moved quickly, silently, through the labyrinthine backyards and overgrown alleys, keeping to the deepest shadows. Julie, despite her terror, kept pressing, keeping to the shadows. Ace, her small hand clutching my jacket like a lifeline. I could feel her trembling, but she didn't complain, didn't falter. She was stronger than she looked. The sounds of the infected on the main street were slowly fading, but the crackle of the bonfire was still audible, a distant roar in the cold night. We were heading away from it, deeper into the residential maze, searching for a temporary haven. "Where are we going?" Julie whispered, her voice still hoarse with fear. "Somewhere safe," I replied, keeping my eyes peeled, scanning every shadow, every broken window. "Somewhere we can hole up until morning." The irony of safe in this world was a bitter taste in my mouth. There was no such thing anymore, only less dangerous. We found an old shed behind a dilapidated house, its paint peeling, its wooden door barely hanging on its hinges. It was small, cramped, and smelled faintly of damp earth and rusted tools. But it was enclosed, out of sight, and surprisingly empty. "In here," I instructed, pulling the door open, quietly. We slipped inside, and I pulled the door shut, securing it with a rusty latch and a coil of scavenged wire. The darkness inside was absolute, suffocating. I kept my headlamp off, letting my eyes adjust, my ears straining for any sound from outside. Julie huddled in a corner, her knees drawn up to her chest, her small body trembling. I could hear her ragged breathing, the soft sniffles as she tried to stifle her sobs. I reached into my pack, pulled out a small bottle of water, and handed it to her. "Drink," I said, my voice softer now, slowly. She took the bottle with shaking hands, her fingers brushing mine. Her skin was icy cold. She drank, gulping greedily at first, then forcing herself to slow down. "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. "You saved me. I thought I was dead." I just grunted in response. There was no need for platitudes. We both knew the score. Death was always a breath away. "What were you doing out here, Julie?" I asked, my voice low. "It's not safe, especially tonight." She hesitated, then took another shaky breath. I was looking for candy, for my little brother Timmy. He loves chocolate. I thought maybe I could find some. Her voice broke on the last word. He's gone. They got him last month. But I keep thinking, if I could just find him some candy, like old times, like Halloween. My heart ached for her. The desperation, the need to cling to fragments of the past, to rituals that no longer held meaning. It was a familiar ache, a mirror of my own grief for Sarah, for the world we'd lost. Timmy would have loved this, she said, her voice a ghost of a whisper, and I realized she was clutching a single crumpled chocolate bar, somehow salvaged from her spilled bag. It was smeared with dirt, and perhaps worse, but she held it like a precious jewel. He always went as a pirate, every year. I just nodded, unable to speak, choked by the sigh. A sudden wave of emotion. Halloween, the night of ghosts and ghouls. And tonight, here we were, two broken souls, hiding in a shed, surrounded by the real monsters, clinging to the ghosts of our past. The silence stretched, broken only by Julie's quiet sobs and the distant fading moans of the infected. The cold began to seep into the shed, chilling us to the bone. I pulled out a spare thermal blanket from my pack and offered it to her. "Here," I said, "it's gonna be a long night." She took it gratefully, wrapping it tightly around her small frame. She still looked terrified, but there was a spark of something else in her eyes now. Resilience, a fragile flicker of hope. Are there others?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Other survivors?" I shrugged. "Maybe. I've been alone for months. Haven't seen anyone in weeks." The lie felt heavy on my tongue. I'd seen others. Some were worse than the infected. Some were the reason I preferred to be alone. "I was with my mom and dad," she continued, her voice gaining a fragile strength. "We were in our cellar, but then my dad got sick. He was coughing really bad, and he started biting. My mom, she tried to stop him. She told me to run, to never stop running." A fresh wave of tears tracked past through the grime on her cheeks. "I ran. I just ran." Her story hit me hard. It was the same story, repeated a million times over, in a million different ways. Loss, betrayal, impossible choices. The world had become a vast, open grave. "You did good, Julie," I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my voice. "You survived. That's all that matters now." She looked at me, her eyes wide and searching. "What do we do now, Alex? Where do we go?" I looked out into the impenetrable darkness beyond the shed door. The first Halloween night after the zombie outbreak. And here I was, not alone, not safe, but still fighting, still surviving. "We get through the night," I said, my voice firm, though I feel doubt. "Let anything but. 1 hour at a time. 1 minute if we have to. Then, when the sun comes up, we figure out the rest." I checked my shotgun again, the reassuring weight of it in my hands. The cold steel, the familiar controls. It was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of my will to survive. For myself, and now, perhaps, for Julie too. The night stretched before us, an endless expanse of darkness and unseen horrors. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't entirely alone. And in this desolate, terrifying new world, that felt like a small, fragile victory. The ghosts of Halloween were real, but so was the faint glimmer of human connection. And that, I realized, might just be enough to get us through. The cold in the shed deepened as the night wore on. Julie had eventually succumbed to exhaustion. her quiet sobs fading into shallow, rhythmic breaths as she slept fitfully, huddled beneath the thermal blanket, the crumpled chocolate bar still clutched in her hand. I remained awake, every nerve ending screaming with alertness, my eyes constantly scanning the unseen. The darkness felt like a physical weight pressing in on me, threatening to suffocate. I heard things in the distance, the occasional low moan carried on the wind, the rustle of something moving through fallen leaves, perhaps an animal, perhaps one of them. The world outside was alive with unseen horror, a constant reminder of the fragile thread we clung to. My mind raced, reviewing escape routes, contingency plans, every possible scenario if the shed were discovered. The smell of the bonfire was still faintly present, a sickeningly sweet aroma that mingled with the damp earth and the metallic tang of fear. It served as a grim reminder of the chaotic scene I had left behind, and the dangers that lay waiting in the heart of the old development. I found myself tracing the outline of Sarah's name, etched into the stock of my shotgun, a faint inscription I had carved months ago. Her memory was a pain, full comfort, a burning ember in the frozen wasteland of my emotional landscape. On a night like this, with the air thick with ghosts, her presence felt almost palpable. I remembered her laugh, her touch, the way she used to hum off-key while cooking. Simple things, things that now felt like ancient history. The irony of Halloween, the night of pretend frights, continued to prick at me. Now the monsters were real. The masks were peeled flesh and vacant eyes. The candy was either a lure for the dead or a desperate, symbolic gesture from the living. This wasn't a holiday. It was a testament to the world's utter collapse. My watch, a sturdy, waterproof G-Shock, showed 2:47 a.m., the darkest part of the night. The hours felt like days, each one stretching my frayed nerves tighter, closer to snapping. I shifted, trying to get more comfortable against the rough wooden wall, but there was no comfort to be found, only cold, hard reality. A sudden scratching sound directly above us made me tense. My grip on the shotgun tightened. A rat? A raccoon? Or something heavier, something with more sinister intent. I held my breath, listening, every muscle coiled. The scratching moved, a slow, deliberate drag, then stopped. Silence. Again. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating darkness. I waited, unmoving, for what felt like an eternity. Nothing. The sound didn't repeat. It could have been anything. But in this world, every anything was a potential killer. Julie stirred in her sleep, a small whimper escaping her lips. I didn't want to wake her. She needed the rest. I, too, longed for sleep, for even a moment of oblivion. But my mind refused to shut down. The constant vigilance was a heavy burden, but it was the only thing keeping me alive. As the minutes ticked by, the moon, now higher in the sky, began to cast faint shadows through the gaps in the shed's decaying walls. I could make out the outlines of rusting tools, discarded buckets, and tarps. The faint, dusty shape of Julie huddled in her blanket. The shed, once a place of mundane utility, had become our temporary tomb, a fragile barrier against the horrors of the night. I started thinking about the morning. What then? If we survived until dawn, the infected would likely disperse somewhat, seeking the shade, or simply meandering aimlessly. But where would we go? Back to my house? It was safe for now, but not forever. With the increased activity and the development, it wouldn't be long before it was discovered. We needed a plan, a destination, but the world was a shattered mosaic of danger and despair. Every town was a graveyard, every road a gauntlet. The countryside offered fewer numbers, but also fewer resources and increased isolation. "Alex?" Julie's voice, small and sleepy, cut through my thoughts. "Are you awake?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice a low rumble. "Couldn't sleep." She shifted, pushing the blanket down, her eyes wide and luminous in the gloom. "I had a dream." "About Timmy. He was dressed as a pirate, and he had a huge bag of candy. He was laughing." A single tear rolled down her cheek. It felt so real. I reached out, my hand hovering for a moment, then gently patted her shoulder. "He's in a better place, Julie." The cliché felt hollow, meaningless. There was no better place now, only worse. "I know," she whispered, "but it's hard to let go." "I know," I repeated, my voice thick. "It never gets easier. You just learn to carry it." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What are we going to do when it gets light?" I sighed, running a hand over my rough beard. "We move. We can't stay here. My place isn't far, but it might be compromised by now." "Your place?" she asked, a flicker of curiosity in her voice. "An old house on the edge of the woods, barricaded, safe for now." I hesitated, then made a decision. It was dangerous, but leaving her alone was a death sentence. We go there, we gather what supplies I have, and then we proceed. "Lan, our next move." She nodded, a faint light of determination in her eyes. "Okay, what do we need to look for?" "Food, water, medicine." I rattled off the essentials. "Anything that can help us survive. A vehicle, if we're lucky, but that's a long shot." "My mom," Julie said suddenly, her voice firmer. "She told me to go to her sister's house in Springfield. She said it was safe there, said they had a shelter." Springfield. It was 200 miles north, a long, dangerous journey, through multiple cities, through countless dangers. But it was a destination, a concrete goal. And in this world, a goal, no matter how distant or improbable, was a powerful thing. "Springfield is a long way, Julie," I said, my voice heavy with the reality of it. "It's dangerous. No guarantee your aunt is even alive, or that her shelter is still standing." "I know," she said, her small chin jutting out. "But it's hope, and my mom told me. I have to try." I looked at her, at the fierce determination in her young eyes, and saw a flicker of Sarah's spirit. The human will to believe, to hope, even in the face of overwhelming despair. It was both a strength and a fatal flaw in this new world. "Okay," I said, my voice betraying my own reluctance. "We aim for Springfield, but we do it smart. We do it carefully, and we do it together." A small, hopeful smile touched her lips, fleeting but real. Together. The word hung in the air, a fragile promise in the suffocating darkness of the shed. For months, it had been me. Now it was us. The burden of responsibility weighed heavily on me, but so did a faint, unfamiliar warmth. My watch showed 3:33 a.m. Still hours until dawn. Still a lifetime until sunrise. But now we had a direction, a purpose, a sliver of hope, however thin. The shed fell silent again, but this time it felt different, not as empty, not as oppressive. The ghost of Halloween still lingered, but now it felt like a challenge, not a crushing despair. We would face it, and we would survive. 1 hour at a time, 1 minute if we had to. Together. The hours crawled by with the painful slowness of a dying man's last breath. Julie eventually drifted back into a fitful sleep, her small body curled into a ball, the thermal blanket her only shield against the creeping cold and the horrors that lurked beyond the shed walls. I maintained my vigil, my senses dulled by exhaustion, but hyper-alert to every whisper of the wind, every creak of the old structure. My mind was a whirlwind of escape routes, supply lists, and the grim calculus of survival. Springfield, a distant beacon, a desperate gamble.
Around 4:45 a.m., a new sound began to filter through the pervasive silence. Not the moans of the infected, nor the rustle of leaves. A faint, repetitive thumping, like a rhythmic, dull percussion, carried on the crisp morning air. My head snapped up, my ears straining. It was distant, but growing steadily louder. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded almost mechanical,
Too unregular to be an animal. Too measured to be the random shuffling of the infected. My blood ran cold. This was different. This was something new, something organized. Alex? Julie's voice, a sleep-roughened whisper, startled me. She was awake, her eyes wide with alarm. She'd heard it too. "Stay quiet," I murmured, my hand on the shotgun. "Don't move." The thumping grew louder, closer. Now I could discern a deeper, heavier sound beneath it, a low rumble that vibrated through the very ground. It was accompanied by a grinding, metallic groan. Then a sudden, blinding flash of light cut through the trees outside, momentarily turning the shed into stark relief before plunging it back into darkness. It was followed by another, then another, like massive, synchronized camera flashes. "What is that?" Julie whispered, her voice trembling. My heart sank. I knew. I had seen them before, in the distance, lumbering specters on the horizon. "Military," I said, my voice grim. "Or what's left of them." The thumping intensified, and now I could make out the distinct churn of massive treads on asphalt. Tanks, armored personnel carriers. They were moving through the old development. A military sweep. On one hand, it meant a potential clearing of the infected. On the other, it meant a new, unpredictable danger. The military, in the final throes of the collapse, had been unstable. Some units were still trying to restore order. Others were ruthless survivalists, seeing any civilian as a threat or a resource to be exploited. And then there were the bombs. They didn't discriminate between the living and the dead. The light outside began to soften, the first faint hint of pre-dawn gray streaking the eastern sky. The thumping and grinding sounds of the approaching convoy were deafening now, reverberating through the shed. I could hear distant shouts, sharp and authoritarian, and then the distinct, heavy crackle of automatic weapon fire. "They're engaging," I muttered. "Close." Julie pressed herself against me, her small body rigid with fear. "Are they good guys, Alex? Will they help us?" I didn't answer. The line between good and bad had long since blurred. In this world, there were only the living and the dead. And sometimes, the living were more dangerous than the dead. The sounds of battle intensified. The rattle of machine gun fire, the deeper thud of a larger caliber weapon, punctuated by the occasional scream, both human and infected. And then the unmistakable roar of an explosion, close enough to shake the shed, sending dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. "They're bombing," I said, my voice flat, "cleansing the area." "But what about us?" Julie cried, her voice rising in panic. "They'll bomb us too." She was right. If they were sweeping the area with heavy ordnance, a shed and an overgrown backyard would be nothing more than collateral damage. We were caught between the hammer and the anvil. "We need to move," I said, scrambling to my feet. "Now, before they get any closer." I peered through a small crack in the shed wall. The pre-dawn light was enough to see. A massive tank, its dark silhouette stark against the paling sky, was lumbering down a parallel street, its turret slowly traversing, its main gun angled toward the houses. Behind it, a squad of heavily armed soldiers moved in a disciplined formation, their rifles scanning. They weren't looking for survivors. They were looking for targets. "Which way?" Julie asked, her voice tight with terror. "Away from the noise," I said, scanning the shed for anything we could use. Nothing. Back of the shed, through the fence. I moved to the back wall, inspecting the flimsy wooden planks. They were old, rotten in places. I pulled out my machete. "Stand back, Julie." With a grunt of effort, I swung the heavy blade, aiming for a weak point in the wood. It bit deep, tearing through the decaying timber with a satisfying crunch. I swung again and again, creating a hole large enough for us to squeeze through. The noise was significant, but the sounds of battle outside, the explosions and gunfire, masked it. "Go!" I urged, pushing Julie through the gap. She scrambled through, her small body sliding between the splintered wood. I followed, pulling myself through, my clothes snagging on the rough edges. We emerged into another overgrown backyard, dense with tall weeds and thorny bushes. The air was cold, crisp, and thick with the smell of gunpowder and burning debris. The rhythmic thumping of the tanks was closer now, vibrating through the ground. "Stay low," I whispered, grabbing Julie's hand. "Follow me. Don't make a sound." We began to move, a desperate dash through the maze of abandoned backyards. We ducked behind rusted swing sets, vaulted over broken fences, crawled through tangles of thorny bushes. Every shadow seemed to writhe with unseen dangers. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed, but I pushed on, adrenaline coursing through my veins.
Nons. Julie, surprisingly, kept pace, her small hand clutching mine, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Dawn. My first Halloween night was almost over, but the nightmare was far from done. As we reached a dense line of trees that bordered the development, the sounds of battle suddenly intensified behind us. A massive explosion, closer than any before, ripped through the morning air. The ground shuddered violently, throwing us to our knees. I turned, looking back. A column of black smoke, thick and oily, was rising into the sky from the direction of the old development, and with it, a new, more terrifying sound, a collective, enraged roar. Not the random moans of the infected. This was different, more focused, more angry. "They pissed them off," I muttered, my blood running cold. "They just wake up the whole damn neighborhood." The military sweep, instead of clearing the area, had agitated the infected, stirring them into a frenzied, desperate rage. They would be moving now, a tide of hunger and fury sweeping across everything in their path. "Run, Julie!" I shouted, pulling her to her feet. "Run!" We plunged into the relative safety of the dense woods, the sounds of the enraged horde and the distant, fading gunshots echoing behind us. We ran without looking back, driven by the primal urge to survive, to escape the hellish dawn of November 1st. My first Halloween night had ended not with a whimper, but with a bang and a desperate, terrifying sprint into the unknown. We were alive, for now. And that was all that mattered. The trees were a blur of green and brown as we plunged deeper into the woods, the undergrowth snagging at our clothes, thorny branches whipping at our faces. My lungs burned, each breath a painful rasp, and the adrenaline that had fueled my dash was beginning to recede, leaving behind a leaden exhaustion. Julie, her small hand still gripped tightly in mine, stumbled behind me, her gasps for air growing more desperate. The sounds from the development were fading, replaced by the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs underfoot, and the frantic pounding of our own hearts. But I knew the reprieve was temporary. The horde, once agitated, would be relentless. They wouldn't stop until they hit a barrier or ran out of living flesh to pursue. "We need to stop," Julie wheezed, tugging at my hand. I can't breathe." I risked a glance back. Nothing but the dense, shadowy woods. But the absence of immediate pursuit didn't mean safety. It just meant we had a few moments to catch our breath, to think. I pulled her behind a massive oak, its gnarled roots forming a natural barrier. We collapsed onto the damp earth, our chests heaving, struggling to fill our lungs with air. The forest floor was a mosaic of decaying leaves and exposed roots, cool and unforgiving. "Are you okay?" I managed, my voice hoarse. Julie nodded, tears streaming down her face, not from pain, but from sheer terror and exhaustion. "Yeah, just so tired." I checked her quickly for injuries. A few scrapes, a branch burn on her arm, but nothing serious. Her eyes, wide and still terrified, darted around the dim woods, seeing monsters in every shadow. The sun was fully up now, its pale light filtering through the dense canopy, turning the forest into a kaleidoscope of dappled shadows and muted greens. November 1st, All Saints' Day, a grim joke from a world that no longer had saints. "We need to keep moving," I said, forcing myself to stand, my muscles protesting. "They'll be following the roads, but if they pick up our scent, they'll come through here." Julie pushed herself up, her movements slow and stiff. She still clutched the crumpled chocolate bar. "Where are we going?" "Deeper into the woods," I replied, scanning our surroundings. "We need to put some distance between us and the development. Then we find a safer route towards Springfield." The word felt like a hollow echo in the vastness of the forest. We moved slowly now, conserving energy, moving with the practiced stealth of hunted animals. My senses were on high alert, listening for any telltale moan, any snapping twig that wasn't our own. The woods were beautiful in their desolation, the trees forming a natural cathedral, their branches reaching for the pale sky. But every rustle of leaves, every shadow held a potential threat. We walked for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper into the wilderness. The sounds of the distant conflict had faded completely, replaced by the chirping of unseen birds, the buzz of insects, and the constant whisper of the wind through the trees. It was a deceptive peace. Around mid-morning, my stomach rumbled fiercely, reminding me of our basic needs. "Food," I muttered. "We need to eat." I found a relatively clear spot by a small trickling stream. The water looked clear, but I wasn't taking any chances. I pulled out my last a filter, a small hand-pump device, and began to filter the water into our bottles. It was a slow, laborious process, but essential. While the water filtered, I rummaged in my pack, pulling out a couple of energy bars. They were tasteless, chalky, but packed with calories. "Here," I said, handing one to Julie, "eat it all." She took it, her eyes still clouded with fatigue and fear. She unwrapped it slowly, then took a small bite, chewing mechanically. It's not chocolate." I felt a pang of guilt. "It's what we have. It'll keep you going." She nodded, forcing herself to eat. As she ate, she finally opened her hand, revealing the crumpled chocolate bar. It was dark, almost black, and clearly past its prime, but still recognizable. Can I bury it?" she asked, her voice small. "For Timmy?" My throat tightened. "Of course, Julie." She found a soft patch of earth near the stream, dug a small hole with her fingers, and carefully placed the chocolate bar inside. She did it gently, patting the earth smooth. She didn't cry this time, just stood there, a small, solemn figure, saying her final goodbye. It was a raw, heartbreaking moment of humanity in a world devoid of it. When she finished, she looked at me, her eyes clearer, a faint trace of resolve in them. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger. "Where to next?" I looked at the filtered water, the half-eaten energy bar, the small, determined girl standing beside me. We had survived Halloween night. We had escaped the military. We had a direction, however distant. "North," I said, pointing deeper into the woods.
We head north, away from everything. We walked for the rest of the day, following deer trails, keeping to the thickest parts of the forest. My mind was constantly assessing, calculating, looking for dangers, looking for opportunities. We passed abandoned hunting cabins, rusted-out vehicles, and the occasional skeletal remains of animals. The forest was an eerie, beautiful tomb. As the sun set,
The sun began to dip toward the western horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues. I knew we needed to find a place to hunker down for the night. The cold would return, bringing with it a deeper darkness and increased dangers. We found a small natural alcove beneath a massive rock formation hidden by thick bushes. It was cramped, barely large enough for the two of us, but it offered protection from the elements and was easily defensible from one direction. "In here," I instructed, sweeping the floor clear of leaves and debris. We crawled inside, Julie first, then me. The air was cool, dry, and smelled of earth and rock. I pulled out our last 2 thermal blankets, spreading one on the floor and wrapping the other around Julie. I kept my shotgun close, resting against the rock face, my hand never far from its cold steel. The last sliver of daylight faded, plunging the woods into a profound darkness. The first night of November. The world was still, as broken, as dangerous as it had been on Halloween. But we were still here, still breathing, still fighting. Julie leaned her head against my shoulder, her small body tired but no longer trembling. "Thank you, Alex," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For everything." I didn't reply, just wrapped my arm around her, a protective gesture that felt both alien and intensely right. We were 2 strangers, thrown together by the apocalypse, connected by a shared terror and a fragile hope. I stared out into the inky blackness, my mind racing, already planning for the morning, for the long, arduous journey to Springfield. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be safe. There would be more horrors, more losses, more moments of despair. But we would face them, together. My first Halloween night after the outbreak had been a terrifying descent into chaos and confrontation. It had forced me to abandon my solitude, to confront my own humanity, and to take on the terrifying burden of another life. But it had also forged a new connection, a fragile bond that might just be the most valuable resource in this broken, desolate world. The real monsters were out there, but so was a sliver of hope, and that, I realized, was enough to keep going. Just one more day, just one more night, until we found Springfield, or died trying. The cold was a constant, gnawing presence in the rock alcove, seeping into my bones despite the thin thermal blanket draped over me. Sleep remained a distant, elusive luxury. My mind raced, constantly replaying the day's events. The grotesque Halloween zombies, the desperate scramble in the alley, the terrifying military sweep, and the resulting agitated horde. Every decision, every close call, every sound was analyzed, dissected, and stored for future reference. Julie, curled up beside me, breathed softly, her fragile slumber a stark contrast to my relentless vigilance. My watch read 01:17, still hours until dawn. The darkness outside was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket, broken only by the occasional distant hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves in the unseen canopy. The forest, usually a source of comfort in its natural wildness, now felt like a vast, predatory maw. The thought of Springfield, Julie's aunt, the distant promise of a sanctuary, was a fragile anchor in the stormy sea of my thoughts. It was a massive gamble, a journey that could easily end in failure, or worse.
But without a destination, without a purpose, the endless grind of survival felt utterly pointless. We needed that hope, however thin. I shifted, the small movement sending a jolt of pain through my protesting muscles. Every joint ached, a testament to the day's exertion. I pulled out a small emergency ration pack, military issue, high calorie, utterly flavorless, and gnawed on a piece, forcing myself to consume the fuel my body so desperately needed. The silence stretched, heavy and profound, punctuated only by my quiet chewing. Then, a sound, faint but distinct. Not a moan, not a shuffle, a metallic clang. A bell, perhaps? Carried on the wind from somewhere deep in the woods, or perhaps from the direction of the abandoned development. My blood ran cold. I froze, every muscle tensed, straining my ears, trying to discern the source, the meaning. There it was again. Clang, followed by a distant, muted thud. Julie stirred beside me, a soft murmur escaping her lips. I gently placed a hand on her arm, a silent warning to stay still. Her breathing hitched. She was awake. She'd heard it too. The clang came again, closer this time, and unmistakably distinct. It was the sound of a small brass bell, like a cowbell, or a cowbell. But why? A new layer of dread settled over me. Bells weren't natural forest sounds. They meant human activity. And human activity in this world was often more dangerous than the dead. Human scavengers, bandits, crazed cultists, I'd encountered them all in my months of solitary survival. Each encounter had reinforced my belief that solitude was the safest path. Now, I wasn't alone. I slowly, meticulously reached for my shotgun, pulling it closer, my finger resting on the trigger guard. My eyes scanned the inky blackness beyond our small alcove, searching for any flicker of light, any unnatural movement. The thumping sound, rhythmic and heavy, returned, accompanying the clanging bell. It was growing louder, closer, moving through the woods in a deliberate, measured pace. It wasn't a patrol. It wasn't a random wanderer. It felt purposeful. "What is it?" Julie whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I don't know," I replied, my voice a low growl, "but it's coming this way." We huddled together, two small, terrified figures, pressed against the cold rock, listening to the approach of the unknown. The thumping grew louder, the clanging bell more distinct. It sounded like something large, something heavy, moving through the dense undergrowth. Then a flicker of light. Not my headlamp, not a distant fire. A moving light, bobbing and weaving through the trees, slowly but steadily approaching our position. It was a lantern, or a powerful flashlight. My mind raced. How many? Who? What was their intention? My grip on the shotgun tightened until my knuckles ached. I had to protect Julie. Whatever was out there, it would have to go through me. The light grew closer, revealing glimpses of the forest floor, casting long, distorted shadows. I could hear rustling now, the heavy tread of boots on fallen leaves, the rhythmic thudding, and that incessant, unsettling clang of the bell. Then they emerged from the darkness, into the faint pre-dawn light that was beginning to filter through the trees. My breath hitched. It wasn't what I expected, and it was far more unsettling. 3 figures, not soldiers, not bandits, not infected. They were dressed in long, dark robes, their faces obscured by deep hoods. Each of them carried a staff, tipped with what looked like crude, sharpened metal. And the one in the lead, the tallest, of the 3, carried a lantern in one hand, and in the other, a long wooden pole from which hung a large brass cowbell. It was this bell that was clanging rhythmically against the pole with each heavy step. They moved slowly, deliberately, their steps synchronized like a macabre procession. They weren't talking, weren't shouting, just moving, steadily, silently, their hooded faces turned toward the ground as if searching for something, or performing a ritual. My mind struggled to process the sight. Cultists? Zealots? In this broken world, anything was possible. They were clearly human, but their silent, ritualistic movements, their dark robes, and that unnerving bell made them feel more alien, more menacing than even the infected. They were heading directly toward our alcove. They weren't looking for us, not yet. They were simply following a path, a direction that intersected with our hiding spot. "Don't move," I whispered to Julie, pressing her further into the rock. "Don't make a sound. We play dead." My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. This was it, the true horror of Halloween night, bleeding into the dawn of November 1st. Not the shambling dead, but the twisted living. The robed figures were almost upon us. I could hear their heavy breathing, the faint swish of their robes, the incessant clang of the bell. The lantern light bobbed closer, illuminating the front of our alcove, then sweeping past. The lead figure, the one with the bell, stopped, his hooded head tilting slightly, as if listening. The other two stopped behind him, their staffs planted on the ground, their forms still and unmoving. My breath hitched, my finger tightened on the trigger. If they saw us, if they even suspected, I would have to act. And in the cramped confines of the alcove, with only 3 rounds in the shotgun, it would be a desperate, bloody fight. The lead figure slowly raised the lantern, its light swirled, weeping across the bushes that obscured our entrance. My muscles tensed, ready to spring, to defend, to kill. The light paused, directly on the dense cluster of thorny bushes that covered our alcove. I could feel Julie trembling beside me, her breath held tight. Then the figure slowly lowered the lantern, and without a word, without a sound, they continued their solemn procession, the clanging bell receding into the distance, followed by the heavy thud of their synchronized steps. I stayed absolutely still, not daring to move, not daring to breathe, until the sounds had faded completely, until the last flicker of their lantern had vanished into the pre-dawn gloom. Only then did I allow myself to let out a long, shuddering breath, my body slumping against the cold rock. Julie sagged against me, her face pale, her eyes wide with lingering terror. "What were those things?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice hoarse. "But they weren't looking for us, and they're gone." The sun was beginning to rise now, painting the eastern sky in soft hues of pink and gold. The first light of November 1st. A new day, a new threat, a new, terrifying mystery. We had survived the Halloween night. We had escaped the horde and the military. And now we had just narrowly escaped the silent, robed figures and their unsettling bell. The world, it seemed, had an endless supply of horrors. "We need to go," I said, pushing myself up, my body still trembling with adrenaline. "Now, before they come back or before something else finds us." Julie nodded, pushing herself up with renewed urgency. We crawled out of the alcove, shaking off the damp leaves and debris. The forest, bathed in the pale light of dawn, still felt menacing, but the immediate threat had passed. We started walking, heading deeper north, away from the development, away from the sounds, away from the memory of the clanging bell and the silent robed figures. Springfield was still hundreds of miles away, an impossibly distant dream. But we were moving, we were alive, and we were together. My first Halloween night after the outbreak had been a crucible, a trial by fire. It had stripped away the last vestiges of my solitude, forcing me to confront not just the walking dead, but the twisted remnants of humanity. It had taught me that in this new world the monsters came in many forms, some with vacant eyes and gnashing teeth, and others with hooded faces and unsettling bells. But it had also shown me the strength of a shared purpose, the fragile resilience of hope, and the undeniable power of human connection. The journey ahead was long, dangerous, and uncertain, but we would face it, one step at a time, one terrifying moment at a time, together. The dashboard clock in the cruiser had read 12. Now it was morning, and the world was still broken. But we were still here, and as long as we were here, we had a chance. And that, I realized, was everything.